It's a great pleasure to welcome to our 2021 Online Trend Summit Danny Tapper, founder of Beak Brewery, a progressive neighbourhood brewery and tap room in Lewes, East Sussex that touches on so many areas of trend manifestation that are evolving at pace right now. Welcome, Danny. It's a great pleasure to have you join us today.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me.
As you'll know better than anyone, the world of craft beer has developed hugely over recent years, but there's a whole new era of sophistication that's developing around place, around collaborations and styles and flavors and even seasonality. So I'm super excited to be exploring some of those topics with you today. Just a note to participants: if you're joining today as a Trend Hub subscriber, you can discover more about the topics that in this discussion within the 2022-23 food and beverage trends framework within the mega trends under respect, where you've got origins and one thing done well, and also the mega trend mind your step, where you'll find more about that under local or leave it. And those are just a couple of the trend manifestations that align with what we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, Danny, you're here obviously talking to us today as founder of Beak Brewery. Can you give us a little bit about your journey to this point? Because I think it's those experiences that have shaped what it is you're doing at Beak.
Yeah, sure. So I got into brewing in quite a convoluted way. So I didn't go down the traditional route of a lot of brewers study essentially brewing at kind of BA and MA level. I was a food and drink writer for almost a decade. So I was writing for quite a few different newspapers, magazines, and quite a lot of my freelance career was based around traveling around the country and across Europe as well, writing about all these incredibly inspiring artisanal, cheese makers and cider makers and, vineyard specialists. And I essentially just became quite jealous of these people and wanted to incorporate something in my life that would be creative within the food industry. So I played around with a few ideas. Like initially I was really into coffee and I thought, I'll do a coffee roastery because I used to live around the corner from Monmouth.
Yeah.
I quickly realized there was going to be a lot of expense involved with setting up a coffee roastery. And also my first passion has always been beer. I was brought up in a family that we never used to really eat at restaurants. I was brought up in the Yorkshire Dales, so we spent a lot of time in stone-flagged pubs. Having nice, hearty pub meals with pints of bitter shandy, even from quite a young age.
Yeah.
So I started homebrewing in my early 20s, and I basically spent almost a decade homebrewing in the kitchen every weekend in between all my freelance jobs. So just taught myself by reading forums, made lots of disastrous homebrews, horrific stuff. But it was all good fun. And eventually my friends started asking, can I buy some of your homebrew? I really like it. And so I was absolutely skint at the time. So I did start selling my homebrew. And eventually I scaled up and got a 100-litre, it's called a Nano Brewery.
Okay, yeah.
A Nano Brewery is essentially a souped up homebrew kit.
Yeah.
Out of steel. Essentially it's everything you would have in a commercial brewery, but on a very small scale. Ran that got free premises in the corner of a warehouse, set it up there. And then, we produced a few hundred bottles at a time. And I just used to drive around the UK in a Polo, like with the boot full of this beer, and started flogging it to restaurants. And luckily, obviously, I had contacts I used to work for the Good Food Guide. And I had quite a lot of contacts from the restaurant world. So, and I think I knew how to communicate about the beer. Quite a lot of brewers sort of like to hide away and not talk about the beer. But I would just go and, talk to the restaurant managers and the bar managers and tell them why they should have this beer and, what dishes on their menu it might go with.
Uh-huh.
The name of it was Beak Brewery, and people just seemed to like it. And so in the end, this kit was so small, I decided I can't possibly keep up with demand. So I started contacting people who owned proper breweries.
Yeah.
And I basically pleaded with them to let me loose on their kit and start brewing my recipes on their kit when I had spare capacity. So that in the brewing world, that's called Nomadic Brewing or Cuckoo Brewing.
Yeah.
So then I started doing full-on batches of beer, which was quite intimidating, like going from this 100-litre Nano kit to the real deal. And then suddenly you have, instead of 500 bottles, you have 5,000 bottles. So yeah, that was a steep learning curve, but it taught me not only how to brew on a commercial scale, but how to sell beer as well on a commercial scale. And slowly it just built up momentum. At that point, I thought I could probably turn this into a business if I'm willing to, take that leap. So I put my life savings, I got some private investment, and decided to set up here in Lewis with a bricks and mortar project. And that was, about a year and a half ago.
How do you kind of articulate what it is that you are?
Well, on a kind of nuts and bolts level, it's a 15-barrel brewery. So what we mean by that is our batches are about 2,500 litres, which is very small. It's a microbrewery. So about 5,000 cans. We're in a little, 2,500 square foot unit on the outskirts of Lewis, which is a historic brewing town in East Sussex.
Yeah.
A lot of people know it for its bonfire, and the other brewery here, which is Harvey's, which is a very traditional family-owned cask ale brewery. It's kind of more than just a brewery. We've set it up as a tap room and community space as well. So we're open every Friday and Saturday to the public. We have different street food traders from across East Sussex every weekend. Lots of live music, events, talks. We also, and the walls are kind of dedicated to local art as well, so it kind of doubles up as a gallery too. It's I guess it's a micro brewery in a nuts and bolts sort of level, but in terms of what we are beyond the physicality of the brewery, and how we position ourselves differently to other people. It's difficult because there's 3,000 breweries in the UK. And whenever I sit next to someone at a wedding, the first thing they ask is so how are you different to me? And I think sometimes a lot of people spend time trying to make themselves different.
Yeah.
It can quite often just become gimmicky.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of breweries fail that try to do things differently just for the sake of doing it differently, and consumers see through it. And at the end of the day, as someone who is more a passionate beer drinker than a passionate business owner, the beers that I like to drink are beers that give me an experience and that leave me with memories, and our unofficial motto here is life affirming ales. And it might sound a little bit over the top and dramatic, but I'm a strong believer that food and drink can give us experiences that truly are life affirming. So if I'm thinking back over my memories over the last 37 years, a lot of those memories are intimately woven through meals I've had, or the drinks I've had with relatives who might have passed away, or in terms of travel as well. When I think of all the places I've traveled to, I actually think of it through the food and drink I've had. And so we're strong believers here at the brewery that if you're having a beer here, we want that to really make its mark on you. And we've banned the word sessionable here at the brewery. Not because we don't like sessionable beers, and by sessionable in the brewing world, we mean, I guess, drinkable beers. So beers that you traditionally would just chuck back and not really think about it. And there's a time and a place for those beers, and they're beautiful in their own right. Those kinds of beers, because it's about much more than just the beer. It's about socializing.
Of course.
But our niche really is creating beers that are to be sipped and thought about and talked about. So a lot of the people who come to the tap room here are people who really like beer, and they'll work. We serve thirds and 2/3, and they'll work their way through all of our taps and talk about it. And I think that's kind of more important than ever, because obviously social media now, that conversation extends beyond the bar to the world. And so you have this international group of people millions and millions of beer drinkers who are sharing their conversations online. And so, this kind of beer it's great for that, because it just lends itself perfectly to that atmosphere. I think another approach of ours is, so we use this word excellence a lot, and again, it sounds a bit over the top, but we always aspire to have the consistency and quality associated with larger breweries. And we're really lucky here. So I used to do all the brewing as a Nomadic brewer, but on this scale, it's just too much. So our head brewer is Robin Head Foreman, who used to be the lead brewer at Burning Sky, which is an incredible world-renowned brewery just down the road. And he's brought that like passion and professionalism to this brewery. And so even though we're very small scale, everything is done on to very high standards. We have a little laboratory here as well, where we do yeast analysis and things like that. So it's like, we take it really seriously as well. So I guess it's that combination of two things. It's like creating interesting beers that change all the time and give people exciting gastronomic experiences, but also we're not just chucking stuff in barrels and hoping for the best.
No, and I think one of the things that came through just by looking at what you do is that feels like it continually evolves. I know that you don't have a standard range of products as well, which I think is really, it feels like a continual evolution.
Yeah, so I think like drinkers have never been more fickle, and I mean that in a positive way. And I'm the same, like when I used to go to the pub, my dad would always order Tetleys. My granddad would always have Theakstons, and there was a brand loyalty there. Whereas now, if you go to the pub, you might have 15, 20 keg lines. Half of those you might not have heard of. And there's a reason for that, and it's because drinkers want to try different things all of the time. And so when we set this up, we specifically decided not to have a core range as such, but just to be changing all of the time. And that it's not only, I think that's not only healthy from a sales point of view because it keeps interest in the brewery, it's also good from a brewer's point of view because you're always learning how to create new styles and always like bettering yourself as a brewery.
One of the things that also struck me is about your kind of approach to kind of flavors, combinations, different hops, kind of varieties and types and styles. Where do you take your inspiration from, and can you kind of bring that to life perhaps with some examples?
Yeah, I mean, there's a strong element of seasonality that runs through all of our beers, and that is just on a very human gastronomic level. Like when the nights start drawing in, we naturally handcraft heartier, warming beers with more mouthful and roasted characteristics. So our dark beers start taking off around about this time of year. We're just about to launch a 10% Imperial Coffee Vanilla Stout, which is just, it's insane. It's got all this really nice earthy roasted notes, which is just like drinking a massive coffee stroke whiskey stroke stout. It's all over the place. And then in summer we do a lot of the kind of lighter beers that are a bit more like quaffable, not sessionable, of course.
Not sessionable.
And refreshing. So lots of saisons and lagers, table beer. So table beer is essentially a pale ale that has a lot of the kind of modern hoppy characteristics of an American IPA, but a classic sort of best bitter ABV of 3.5%. So you kind of enjoy all the flavors, but you can do it without getting too squiffy. But moving beyond that, I mean, a lot of breweries do that, so that's nothing particularly different. But in terms of actual seasonality, what we're trying to do at the moment is we're midway through launching a mixed fermentation project. And by that, what we mean is it's traditionally all beer is made with a pedigree yeast strains that have been designed to create beers. Saccharomyces, it's called. And those yeast strains are great, and there are thousands of varieties, but they tend to create quite similar beers. So what we're trying to do here is, we've got a mixed fermentation project where we're focusing on making beers that showcase the local area and ingredients from it. So essentially, they're beers with a sense of place. And what we mean by that is we are using native wild yeast strains harvested from local fruit and flowers. We're using grain, which is grown in our own fields just a few miles down the road. Hops, again, just from down the road. But more importantly, we're then putting the beer into oak barrels. You can see one here. And within those oak barrels are all kinds of weird and wonderful natural yeast strains which inoculate the beer. and which are unique to where we are here. So there is inherently an element of seasonality in that, because you can only brew those kinds of beers at certain times of the year due to the temperature.
Yeah.
So due to the fruits we harvest or the grapes that come from local vineyards, at the moment we're thinking about a new beer, mixed fermentation beer to do, but we're completely, we're at the mercy of the seasons in terms of thinking about what local fruits we can use. So yes, there's sort of two elements of seasonality. There's the traditional, light beers in summer, darker, hearty beers in winter. But then there's this kind of mixed fermentation project, which is a much kind of better expression of the seasons, I would say.
And from a mixed fermentation perspective, what's your hope that how that will impact the flavour, the texture, the mouthfeel? How will it be different, I suppose, what's your hope for that?
The flavour of the beers that we have in these barrels is actually, even down to where they're placed in the brewery, is different. So we currently have a big rack of freshly emptied white wine barrels, which are full of beer, racked up next to the roll shutter of the brewery. And just due to the positioning of the sun through the day, half of the barrels end up in the sun and ferment completely differently and have completely different characteristics. So the really fun thing about that, especially for Robin, who is, he's pretty much a master blender, is at the end of the day, you don't just package that beer, you go through individual barrels and you pick out the barrels you want to work with.
Yeah.
So the ones that have been in the sun are kind of a little too flavoursome, because you're getting all of the tannins coming from the wood.
Yeah.
Perhaps fermented a little bit quicker at a higher temperature, so you've got more esters and aromas. And then the ones that are just out of the sun are kind of, maybe there's too little character in them. And so the job of us guys is to go through individual barrels and literally blend them in a glass and think, what blend works. So for us, that's really exciting, because that's literally physically the sun having an effect on the flavour of the beer. But yeah, a lot of people, if you speak to a lot of people who do mixed fermentation beers, they'll always say that the barrels dictate the beer, not the brewer. So you cannot really direct what's going to happen. You put the beer in the barrels, you keep tasting it, and when you're happy, you go for it. It's like, some of these have been going for 6 months and we're still not happy with it. So from a financial point of view, it's probably not a good idea.
Obviously, you sell all sorts of different types and styles, but what are from your point of view, some of the characteristics that work really well?
I mean, it's all comes down to kind of balance at the end of the day for me. There's kind of a lot of breweries doing really wacky, weird stuff out there, but when you look at the ones that are successful, they're the breweries who manage to maintain an element of balance.
Yeah.
There's no point of creating, 10% imperial stout with donuts and fudge and hot chocolate and things if it just tastes like a mess. At the end of the day, it comes down to balance. And we actually work quite a lot. We spend a lot of time reading a book called The Flavor Thesaurus,
of course,
which a lot of chefs use.
Yeah.
The great thing about that is you can look into different flavors that are naturally coming from the beer. So it might be, let's say, coffee.
Yeah.
It gives a lot of stouts taste of coffee. And then it would give you, like 16, 20 other combinations that you might not have thought of, like quince, like who'd have thought quince works with coffee. And so as brewers, that's quite exciting, because then it opens up new possibilities about what we can put in these barrels with the beer. But again, like the flavor thesaurus is all about balance as well. So yes, it's about interesting, challenging flavor combinations, but there has to be drinkability and balance.
Yeah. There are some stereotypes around kind of craft beer and craft brewing. What are they, and how are you breaking them or challenging them?
So the brewing world's going through really interesting changes at the moment, and I think a lot of people who perhaps haven't been involved in craft beer recently probably still think there's this image of the big bearded, like lumberjack shirt wearing man, and it always is a man, like doing the brewing, and the reality is that's changing, and I'm really happy it is, because there's no reason why beer is inherently masculine. It's like it's almost the antithesis of masculinity, and like the god of yeast is female, and the god of beer is a female. And traditionally, all brewers tended to be brewsters, and it was the man who did the serving of the beer. So, in terms of masculinity, I would say there has been a big movement against that.
Yeah.
And right now, actually, that's quite topical. So we're seeing a lot of the larger craft breweries are getting involved in problems with the way they've been treating female members of staff, people are pulling out of festivals. And, that it's good. It needs, we need to talk about that as an industry and try and be a little bit more progressive. And for me, Beak Brewery, that's sort of what we've always tried to aspire to be like, a little bit different, even down to the logo. So when we were commissioning the logo from my friend, the artist Jay Cover, I specifically said I don't want anything masculine or anything that looks like a brewery. And what he came up with was actually something that's probably looks more like a 1980s or 90s French wine label.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. Like, we think it looks cool, but also we want people to feel welcome here that perhaps wouldn't feel welcome, into the craft beer industry. And so hopefully, like I'd say that's probably the biggest change we're seeing in the industry right now. And I hope that accessibility is apparent in our branding. Personally, I am not just interested in beer. Like, beer is one thing that interests me. Also into film, into photography, into music. And so as a brewery, we're always trying to think about how we can appeal to, people beyond the scope of beer, and maybe use that as a way of getting people interested in beer. So, for example, recently we launched like a line of workwear jackets.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
A lot of people, I think they're like, why are you doing that? What's the point of spending all this time working on those jackets? But we've had a lot of people send photos of them wearing these jackets in like Berlin and Brooklyn, and those people aren't necessarily beer drinkers. They just liked the look of these workwear jackets we made. Yeah. But perhaps, a part of wearing those jackets, they'll start having conversations with people about brewing and beer. Maybe it's a way into it. And we're just about to do a collaboration with a skateboard brand.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, we've worked with lots of different chefs and restaurants. So we're just always trying to look for new ways to, speak to people beyond the scope of beer.
How do you think then that the craft beer drinker, and you touched on some really interesting points there, how do you think that they've evolved compared to, 3-5 years ago? What kind of space are they in now, the craft beer drinker or the craft beer nerd, perhaps?
I think there's been a big move towards small pack, so cans. I think the pandemic has a lot to answer for. So what we saw when the pandemic hit is obviously every pub in the UK closed down. And at the same time, people were spending a lot more time in front of their computer screens and on their phones and browsing through social media. And as a result of that, people started discovering breweries, heading to their websites and ordering small pack beer. And I think that's actually changed the drinking habits of people for the good. So traditionally, people would go and order pints at a bar. And now it's much more about, like we were talking earlier, that, experience of buying. People will come on our website and they'll buy, let's say, 6 cans, and every can will be different.
Yeah.
They won't buy 6 of the same beer.
6 of the same, yeah.
And then, like every Friday and Saturday, our social media feed is like, littered with notifications and shares of people trying our beers and talking about it. So, I think there's definitely been a move towards individual small experiences as opposed to volume-based brewing. I'd say that's probably like the biggest change. It's happened in the last 12 months. The demographics changed massively.
Yeah.
Seeing loads more women involved in the industry, getting their voices heard, which is really good. Food has become more important, like for sure. Yeah. So, I remember I used to go to the pub, 10 years ago, and I never remember even thinking about food.
Yeah.
It's quite a British thing, I think that. But I think, overall people now, they don't just want to go out and drink a beer and not think about food. I think, a lot of our beers are kind of 7-8%. And if you have a few of those beers and you haven't got any kicking his stomach, it's bad news. So here at the tap room, we've always made food really central to what we're doing.
It feels like lagers are having a bit of a comeback. What are some of those others, I guess trends, I suppose, that you're seeing from a types and styles point of view?
So in terms of styles, I think kind of the industry's probably going through almost a bit of a sort of postmodern trend at the moment. So people are rediscovering traditional styles and celebrating them again. And the evolution of the craft beer drinker used to be hoppy American pale ale, even stronger, even hoppier American, IPA, and then it was 10% imperial stouts. And when you could enjoy an imperial stout, that was seen as the pinnacle of craft beer nerdery, and you won the respect of all your fellow craft beer fans. And now it's just gone full loop to confuse everyone even more. You go to a beer festival now, that the real craft beer fans and nerds are all drinking German style lagers, which is hilarious, because 5 years ago they would have been utterly derided. And now it's lager really is the big thing, and then also saisons, so classic Belgian style dry peppery saisons. They come back for sure. But then, I mean, it's not all about change, so New England IPAs are here to stay for sure. So I don't know how much people know about New England IPAs, but essentially a New England IPA is they're brewed with more protein rich grains, so you have that opaque almost like orange juice character, and then a little bit of acidity and just loads of fruit forward hop flavors. And that style is here to stay for sure. And I don't think things will ever be quite the same again.
No, I've tried a couple of those, and going back to your point about experiences, it's not something that you just throw back. It's something that you savor and enjoy, and it starts to get closer to for me, it's almost like a food experience, really.
And it's a little bit like, when the whole third wave coffee trend happened, or when sourdough bread started making it big. When you try those things, it's very hard to go back to something that is objectively less flavoursome. And like New England IPAs, they just are very flavoursome beers, and you even if you don't like the beer, you can't deny that they're an incredible flavour experience.
Thinking about Beak in 5 years from now, where do you hope to be, and what will you hope to have achieved by that point?
Well, things are changing so quickly here. I mean, we've literally just entered our 12th month. So, and I never ever expected it to have grown like this in 12 months. So 5 years seems like an absolute
lifetime away.
But I think what we really want to do is expand our mixed fermentation project. So those beers with a sense of place, we want those to become a much bigger part of the brewery. We want to grow in size. We've grown out of this unit, so we're looking for kind of a larger flagship space. We're going to definitely stay here in Lewis. We love it here. Just constantly like trying to push ourselves, and focusing on the idea of excellence, and just trying to remain relevant, and pushing boundaries as well, hopefully.
That's brilliant, Danny. Thank you so much. A huge thank you for joining us today. Thank you from Team TFP and the 2021 Summit audience for sharing the Beak story so far. It feels like there's so much more to come. You're on point with so many of the trend touch points right now, and I summarized them for attendees earlier on, but it spans the whole spectrum, I think, what you're doing, and it's really exciting to see how craft brewing continues to move into new spaces, and in some cases is coming back around full circle as well. So thank you again for joining us today. Now, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you.